What does the Catholic Church really say about condoms? This is a question that sparks a lot of debate, both inside and outside the Church. Let's take a deep and respectful look at the official teachings, the reasoning behind them, and how this all plays out in the real world. The Catholic Church's teaching on the use of condoms is very clear. It is not permitted. This stance is rooted in a profound understanding of human sexuality. The Church views sexual intercourse as a sacred act, a complete gift of self between a husband and a wife. This act has two inseparable purposes: the unitive, which deepens the bond between the spouses, and the procreative, which is the openness to new life. As the Catechism of the Catholic Church, or CCC, states in paragraph 2366, each and every marital act must of necessity retain its intrinsic relationship to the procreation of human life. Using a condom, or any form of artificial contraception, is seen as deliberately closing off that procreative aspect. It introduces a barrier, not just physically, but spiritually, to the total self-giving that marriage calls for. The Church teaches that life is a sacred gift from God, beginning at conception. From this perspective, a condom is viewed as an obstacle to God's creative power. So, are there any exceptions? Does the Church allow condoms for any reason at all, like preventing the spread of disease? The official answer is no. This has been a point of significant discussion, especially concerning married couples where one spouse has HIV. Some theologians have argued that using a condom in this specific case might be a lesser evil, intended not to prevent life, but to preserve life by preventing transmission of a deadly virus. However, the magisterium, the teaching authority of the Church, has not approved this view. The consistent teaching is that abstinence is the only morally certain way to avoid transmitting HIV/AIDS within a marriage. The argument is that introducing a contraceptive act, even with a good intention, violates the fundamental meaning of the marital union. The Church proposes a radical call to chastity and fidelity. As it says in Genesis, "Therefore a man shall leave his father and his mother, and hold fast to his wife, and they shall become one flesh." This one flesh union is seen as compromised when an artificial barrier is introduced. Let's break down the main objections the Church has to condoms. First, as we've mentioned, they interfere with the procreative purpose of sex. In the encyclical Humanae Vitae*, Pope Paul VI reaffirmed that every marital act must remain open to the transmission of life. Deliberately blocking this potential is seen as going against God's design. Second, there's a concern that widespread availability of condoms can encourage a culture of promiscuity. The idea is that condoms can create a false sense of security, separating the sexual act from its inherent responsibilities and commitments, leading to more casual sexual encounters outside the committed bond of marriage. Third, the separation of sex from responsibility is a key point. It detaches the life-giving potential from the act of love, turning it into something less than a total gift of self. Finally, the Church believes this can weaken the institution of marriage itself. When a couple deliberately chooses to exclude God's potential for creating life, it can be seen as asserting their own will over God's plan for their union. The sexual act is meant to be a renewal of the marriage vows, a total, faithful, and fruitful gift. Contraception, in this view, fundamentally alters that meaning. The HIV/AIDS pandemic has presented a massive challenge to this teaching. The Church recognizes the gravity of the crisis, but it stands firm that promoting condoms is not the right path. The Church's position is that condoms can foster a false sense of security, which might lead to riskier behavior, and thus, paradoxically, could contribute to the spread of the virus. Instead, the Catholic Church advocates for a solution based on human dignity and responsibility. This approach is often summarized as the ABC model: abstinence, be faithful, and condoms only as a last resort, though the Church emphasizes the A and B. The focus is on character formation, education in chastity, and fidelity within marriage. The YOUCAT, the Youth Catechism, asks in question 420, "May a Christian married couple regulate the number of their children?" It answers that they may and should, but only through responsible means that respect the integrity of the sexual act, which points towards natural family planning. This brings us to statements from recent popes. In 2009, Pope Benedict XVI caused a stir during a trip to Africa when he stated that condoms are not the solution to the AIDS epidemic and can, in fact, aggravate the problem. This was widely reported and criticized. Later, in an interview for the book Light of the World, he addressed this. He suggested that for some individuals, like a male prostitute, the use of a condom might be a first step in a movement toward a different way, a more human way, of living sexuality, not as a moral solution, but as an act of reducing harm to others. The Vatican quickly clarified that this was not a change in the Church's general teaching against contraception. Pope Francis has largely maintained this position. He has spoken about the issue with a pastoral tone, acknowledging the complexity and the great perplexity the Church faces. While upholding the prohibition, he has encouraged theologians to study the issue, particularly in the context of preventing disease transmission, but has not altered the official doctrine. So, what is the alternative the Church proposes for spacing births? It's called natural family planning, or NFP. This is very different from contraception. NFP involves tracking a woman's natural cycles of fertility and infertility, and choosing to abstain from intercourse during the fertile periods if the couple has serious reasons to postpone a pregnancy. The Catechism, in paragraph 2370, explains that periodic continence and the use of infertile periods are in conformity with the objective criteria of morality. The key distinction is that NFP works with the body's natural rhythms, respecting the design of the Creator. It requires communication, self-discipline, and mutual respect between the spouses. They are not introducing an artificial barrier to block life, rather, they are choosing to abstain from the act that could lead to life during a specific time. They remain open to life in principle, even if they are seeking to postpone a pregnancy. How do NFP and condoms compare in terms of effectiveness? Studies show that with perfect, consistent use, modern methods of NFP can be very effective, with failure rates as low as 2 to 9%, comparable to the 2% perfect use failure rate of condoms. However, the typical use failure rate for NFP is higher, around 25%, because it requires diligence and a learning curve. For condoms, the typical use failure rate is around 15 to 18%. So, while NFP is morally acceptable to the Church and has no physical side effects, it demands more from the couple. Condoms are simple and protect against STIs, but they are morally illicit in Catholic teaching. Given this, how does the Church respond to public health programs that distribute free condoms? It opposes them. The Church argues these programs implicitly promote a lifestyle that it considers immoral. Instead, Catholic relief organizations like Catholic Relief Services run extensive HIV prevention programs, especially in Africa. These programs focus on education about abstinence and fidelity, providing HIV testing and counseling, and working to reduce the stigma associated with the disease. They do not, however, distribute condoms. This approach is sometimes criticized by public health officials who see condoms as a vital tool. But for the Church, the moral and spiritual dimensions cannot be separated from the physical. This stance has had a significant impact, particularly in Africa, where the Catholic Church has a huge presence through its schools and hospitals. Critics argue that the anti-condom message has hindered efforts to control the AIDS epidemic in some regions. They might point to countries with a different approach. However, the Church maintains that its focus on behavior change and fidelity is the only true long-term solution. It's a debate between a pragmatic, harm reduction model and a principled, moral formation model. Interestingly, there's a significant gap between the official teaching and the beliefs of many lay Catholics. Polls consistently show that a large majority of Catholics in Western countries believe the use of condoms is morally acceptable, at least for preventing disease. For instance, a 2015 Pew study found that 80% of American Catholics say using contraceptives is either morally acceptable or not a moral issue. This disconnect between the hierarchy and the laity is one of the biggest challenges the Church faces on this topic. It highlights a tension between following one's formed conscience and adhering to official Church doctrine. The Bible calls us to be transformed by the renewing of your mind, as St. Paul writes in Romans 12:2, and for many, this renewal leads them to conclusions that differ from the magisteriums. So, will the Church's view change in the future? A formal change in the core doctrine against artificial contraception is highly unlikely. It's a teaching with deep theological roots going back centuries. However, the pastoral approach may continue to evolve. Pope Francis's emphasis on mercy and discernment might allow for more nuanced guidance from priests and bishops on a case-by-case basis, especially in complex situations like disease prevention within a marriage. While the rule remains, the application may see a greater emphasis on conscience and pastoral care. In conclusion, the Catholic Church's prohibition of condoms is absolute, and based on its theology of marriage and sexuality as a total, faithful, fruitful, and free gift of self. It sees condoms as an artificial barrier that violates the procreative and unitive nature of the marital act. In response to issues like family planning and HIV, the Church champions natural family planning and a call to chastity and fidelity. While this position is challenging and often countercultural, and though many lay Catholics disagree, it remains the firm and consistent teaching of the Catholic Church. Thanks for watching. If you found this explanation helpful, please like the video and subscribe for more deep dives into complex topics. See you next time.